Can everyone hear me? Okay, that's too close. All right. I just want to start off by saying how excited I am to be here. How grateful I am. The song that we ended with last night, the Hezé, the song really touched me. That, in the Lord I will be thankful. Because I remember, months ago, over a year ago, talking about this with Kathy and the other folks in our planning group, and should we do this? And here we are. I pinched her when we were here yesterday. I'm like, it's real, it's happening. Okay. I'm going to begin with a joke, not because it has anything to do with my presentation. Well, maybe it does. But as I was reminded yesterday by David McDougall, where's David? There he is. On the car ride yesterday from Pearson, because laughter is a good thing. All right, you ready for this? I don't do jokes, so this is kind of One day, God summoned the Pope, the President of China, and the President of the United States. Okay, said God, the world's gonna end in 10 years. Go and prepare your people. So the Pope went back to Rome and prepared a great gathering at St. Peter's Square. There he announced, "Dear Christians, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is that God is real. The bad news is that the world is coming to an end in 10 years, so we should repent." Next, the President of China spoke to the entire government saying, "Comrades, I have horrible news. First, God is real. Second, he says the world is coming to an end in 10 years. Finally, the President of the United States, I'm not naming names, went back to Washington, because I have to finish my degree in the United States. Finally, the President of the United States went back to Washington, called a press conference to address the nation, and live on camera, with a big grin on his face, he said, "Great news, everyone. God thinks I'm important." Okay, that actually did fly here. I'm so glad. So, I apologize to any Trump supporters out there. We're trying to be a Synodal church. Okay, so I asked Keith to put a QR code to my presentation. So if you miss some words here and there, I'm pretty much going to say exactly what you see if you scan that QR code. Yesterday, Father Raymond reminded us of the opening of Gaudium et Spes, which calls all followers of Christ to unite with the poor and afflicted, to share their griefs and hopes. Well, here's my hope, my deepest longing. I dream of a church that is inclusive and affirming of all people, regardless of gender, ability, race, class, and most importantly for me, sexual orientation. I'm going to spend the next several minutes sharing with you why I think that's important, what the stumbling blocks are, how we can overcome them, and practical steps to becoming a more welcoming church. Now the thing is, I've had to revise this so many times because of the wonderful presentations from before. The other thing is, I'm not going to dwell too much on the how part, the practical steps. We have wonderful resources in New Ways Ministry, outreach. There are even some parishes who are represented here that have welcoming ministries to LGBTQ+ folks. So reach out to one another. But I want to focus on the first parts. So the first thing, just a quick note about the terms welcoming, inclusive, and affirming. So an LGBT person like myself would hear those words and certain things would come to mind. So in a welcoming church, the folks are polite and friendly, but its theology upholds the belief that marriage is reserved for a man and a woman, and that identifying as a transgender person is a disorder. As such, a welcoming church would not allow for same-gender marriages. They would not hesitate and refuse leadership positions for 2S LGBTQ+ folks, and they would counsel 2S LGBTQ+ persons away from sexual activity. So that's the welcoming church. In contrast, the exact opposite is the affirming church. These churches fully and without qualification treat 2S LGBTQ+ persons equally. An affirming church celebrates and even finds a place for a person's unique gifts. In an affirming church, LGBTQ people are not barred from doing ministry in the church. An affirming church holds a theology that teaches that God created each person the way they are, and that LGBTQ+ members don't need to conform to cisgender or heteronormative social and religious constructs. And affirming churches, along with inclusive churches, are intentional about using affirming and inclusive language. And then finally, inclusive churches. So inclusive churches are similar to affirming churches in that there's full and unqualified participation in the life and ministry of the church by LGBTQ+ people. However, what makes it different is that they intentionally allow for differences in beliefs among their members, as long as those differences aren't being used to deny LGBTQ+ people their rights. So inclusive churches allow people to live out their personal convictions as long as those in privileged positions, that is straight and cisgender people, don't force their beliefs on anyone else. Now, the reality is, many of us occupy these spaces day to day. Workplaces, family homes, schools are inclusive spaces. We often operate within relationship circles that encompasses different perspectives politically, theologically, and socially. I would even say that putting a rainbow flag by a Catholic chapel, as we have, is great, but given the official teaching of the Catholic Church on same-sex sexual activity and same-gender marriage, it is more a sign of welcome than it is a sign of inclusion. It's my hope, though, my deepest longing, that being on this synodal road will bring us to a place of inclusion and eventually affirmation. But maybe not in my lifetime. But as I learned in the United States from Martin Luther King Jr., what happens if you don't see the end of segregation in your life? And he said, does anyone remember it? The road to justice is long, but it bends towards justice. Something like that. The arc of history is long. Thank you, Christine. This is beautiful being in Synodal Church. Okay, all right, so why should we be inclusive and affirming? Number one, because it's what we want. Diocesan, national, continental summaries following the opening of the Synod all show this. I collected actually every single diocesan summary in Canada. I can send you that link. All of those who posted them online. Some of them did not. But more than half of those actually mentioned LGBTQ. And that blew my mind when I read these summaries across the country. Second, Pew Research in 2009 and 2015 suggests that over half of Catholics leave the church because they disagree with church teachings, including its stance on LGBTQ+. Another reason why we should be inclusive and affirming is because theologically, the entire trajectory of salvation history is towards all people, beyond one tribe. The good news of Jesus, the love of a merciful Creator, is for all people, including those we've marginalized. And finally, as a civilization, we need to learn to be inclusive. We are more fragmented than ever before in human civilization. The church must be a sign of how to live in harmony amid differences. I can't remember which of the prayers from yesterday's Mass reminded us that the Trinity is the model for this unity in diversity. Okay, so you probably know all of this stuff already. Here's the stuff that I'm going to try to introduce that's different. What is stopping us? From a psychological level, we all need to feel secure. Good parenting, emotionally supportive relationships, accepting faith community help foster security. After all, faith is trusting in God amid the unknowns. Faith communities should model faith in God. And remember, it's faith in God, not faith in the church. It's not churchianity, as Richard Rohr calls it. Right? It's not this transactional faith, I do this, I get that. It is faith in God. Now, underlying our psychology of needing to be secure is our evolutionary biology. In millions of years of evolution, we have evolved as prey. Think about that for just a second. So encoded in us over millions of years is the fear of being harmed by external threats to ourselves, to my family, to our tribe. Millions of years, deep into our DNA, we are prey and fear-based. That's a tough thing to get out of. This is operating in us subconsciously. And we see this played out today when some folks view illegal immigrants as a threat to jobs. And on the other side, we see this played out when some folks see billionaires as a threat to social security. This fear of being harmed also lies at the heart of many of our biases. How many of you remember that beautiful handbook at the beginning of the Synod, the Vademecum? And in the back, there are these wonderful lists of biases that we all have to be aware of as we are conversing in the Spirit. I remember I was at Pierre's parish, and one of the days for the mission, I used it as a sort of like an examination of conscience. You could just copy and paste that and write examination of conscience on the top. How are we being biased in these different ways? And what also drives our biases is a sense of disgust. We have this sense to tell us what's healthy and what's poison, but we also apply it to groups of people. For ancient Jews, the purity laws can be interpreted as a codified expression of that. For many white Americans prior to desegregation, sharing a water fountain with an African American was considered to be utterly disgusting. For some straight folks, same-sex sexual activity and even expression also conjure the same type of disgust. As a theologian, these instincts are what I would categorize as original sin. Original sin is the instinct in all of us, away from communion or siblinghood, but instead toward isolation and separation. These instincts also lie at the heart of our fear to leave the upper room to go into the unknown. Now, I can understand how difficult it would be to lose the traditionalists who fill our pews and come with deep pockets. I can understand how throughout history, our church has faced trauma after trauma and is hurt to take yet another risk to leave the upper room. I remember reading this one book from ecclesiologist from Australia named Ormond Rush. Very good. And he looks at history in terms of social sciences. And he sees that as a church, we have faced trauma after trauma. And we haven't worked through that. In fact, when we face yet another trauma, we hold tightly, we define, we solidify, we build the walls even higher, because that's what keeps us safe from trauma. Now, I also remember hearing recently the queer theorist Judith Butler commenting on the state of affairs in the United States and saying that really Trump has a lot of unresolved trauma. And so I guess that first joke is kind of interesting. So yeah, we have to work through that. I remember being in the Religious Education Congress in Los Angeles, and a presenter there talking about RCIA and welcome. And he says, something in each and every one of us needs to die in order for me to reach out to my neighbor and say, how is it going? Something as basic as that, right? So for those of us introverts out there, it's excruciatingly painful to do But I remember at World Youth Day in Poland, anyone go to World Youth Day in Poland? Of course, one. Serena. So Pope Francis did something incredibly amazing. He asked people to turn to their neighbors and greet one another. It's 1 million people out on this open field. And I wanted to get a better spot because we were at a really bad section and like there's this big Megatron in the way. So I left my group and I walked down this road and all of these people were around. Now, the genius of Pope Francis there is that he knows that these 1 million young people would probably not interact with the other 1 million young people around them, even if they're like sleeping next to them. And yet he had this genius to say, these people have this instinct not to break out of my shell. Pope Francis is going to say, get out of your shell. Get out of the upper room. Just say hi to your neighbor. Just as simple as that. Just as simple as that. Okay. Yes. I can also understand how our piety, legalism, scrupulosity, and clericalism provide us with security in the face of threats. But as Father Greg so well put it, we must embrace the fire that has and continually descends upon us and already dwells in us. We must seek the empty tomb and be grateful in the God of undying love. But how exactly do we do that? This is this long road between what I need to do, what I know I should do, and doing it. We can turn to good behavioral psychology for that. Number one, we can cultivate security by stating and respecting boundaries, building self-confidence, learning to manage emotions well, practicing self-care, gratitude, forgiveness, not comparing ourselves with others, finding emotional support, doing therapy, and so on and so forth. We can overcome disgust by pairing it with something pleasant, linking it to our personal values, and practicing mindfulness to manage emotional responses. I'm trying to do this with Trump, it's not working so easily. We can overcome our prey mentality of being passive and fearful by embracing challenges and seeing them as opportunities and building confidence through action. And yes, so much of that is done in silence, where we face ourselves and our Creator. And finally, according to a growing amount of research, conversation with others is the best way to build bridges with those who disagree with us. It is the key to overcoming this instinct to see the other as a threat to me. We must get into the habit of encountering others and journeying with them, even when we disagree, so long as our boundaries are respected. Okay, so I currently serve as a licensed lay pastor for the Edmonton Moravian Church. Am I? And our churches are in full communion with the Anglican Church and the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Canada. And over the past 2 years, we've been doing more ecumenical things together. Not even ecumenical, this is like full-on partnership stuff. So we had this beautiful Advent celebration, and I'm just so happy because I'm around my people, my progressive Christians from Todos, 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 ecumenical. And then I go home, and it's a wintry day in Edmonton. I'm going to take an Uber. So I take an Uber, and I'm talking with this young man who's from Eritrea. And he's asking me, where I come from, and what was I doing in the church, and I told him, I'm a gay pastor in the Moravian Church, and he had this wonderful thing, and you could see his body tense up, because he is not gay affirming. From his country, there are no gay people in Eritrea. That's what he claims. And I didn't want to push it because I was still in this elated state of, oh, what a wonderful liturgy. But it just bothered me. So I just kept on asking him about his faith. He grew up Orthodox. And I was like, tell me about the Jesus you believe in. And he had, sort of good basic answers like, love your neighbor, love your enemies. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then, the conversation/debate kept on getting a little bit more heated. And at the end, I was listening to myself and saying, okay, put on my pastoral hat. Think about what's going on here. I remember Cardinal Newman's quote, "Win an argument, lose a soul." And I remember synodality as being listening to hearts and not listening to debate the other. So I said to him, what was that like growing up in Eritrea as an Orthodox Christian? He said it was brutal. He said that there were Pentecostals that would protest in front of their church every Sunday. And I'm like, that must have been hard. That must have been hard. And I can relate to you. Because as a gay person, there are churches that would disagree with me being even existing. But from that moment, we had this connection. We went from debating his experience to listening to his heart. It's faith-seeking wisdom, faith-seeking the Holy Spirit, rather than faith-seeking the logic that's faulty. Okay, so I think we're going to leave it there. You have the links to how to become a more welcoming parish for LGBTQ plus persons. Father James Martin's talk. Thank you, Oamai Lacombe, folks. It's on your website that I found Father James Martin's talk, posted in full for everyone to see, which includes tips for how parishes can become welcoming. New Ways Ministry, who is the publisher of my book, which I co-edited, is a wonderful Catholic outreach that's been around for a very long time, and they do wonderful, wonderful work. And they do have a book called LGBTQ plus Catholics, A Guide to Inclusive Ministry, as well as another book called New Ways and Next Steps Developing Parish LGBTQ plus Ministry. And then Outreach, which is an LGBT Catholic resource, has lots of news and essays and resources for Catholics who want to minister to their LGBTQ plus siblings. You can find all that information online. Thank you so much, everyone, for your listening, for your curiosity, for your openness, for your sharing of hearts. I am so excited to listen to your feedback outside of this. Thank you.